break. Hope you guys are good, staying safe. Hope to see you guys soon. You guys are coming back to school next week. I'm excited to see you guys. But we're going to try to go ahead and knock out one of the most important topics we're going to talk about in my class today is the Great Depression and also the Dust Bowl. Okay, so we've kind of mentioned them a little bit in my class. We're going to go into more detail today, understanding kind of what the Great Depression was and also what the Dust Bowl was. And we're going to kind of look at how it played a key factor in our state's history. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with our lesson today. Okay, so this is a picture of it looks like a church. Yeah, it says Church of God. Okay, so it's a Church of God, probably out somewhere near the Panhandle out in western Oklahoma, that is literally about to get engulfed in dust. Okay, so these dust storms were very, very common during this time, and I'll kind of explain the reason. But there was a huge drought that kind of encompassed the whole Great Plains, meaning all the way from like North Dakota all the way down into Oklahoma, where there were periods and months of no rain at all. Okay, so in Oklahoma, as we know, is a pretty agricultural state, and it needed water to grow crops and pretty much sustain life. Okay, so eventually that gets taken away and around the early parts of the 1930s. So we'll look at that here in a few minutes. Okay, so a lot of things were going on in America at the time of the Great Depression and eventually the Dust Bowl. Okay, so America had seen so much success in the early parts and the middle parts of the 1920s. Okay, so this area of Oklahoma history and also U.S. history is called the Roaring Twenties. Okay, I don't know if anybody has ever seen the movie The Great Gatsby, but it's with Leonardo DiCaprio, and it kind of depicts how wealthy people were getting in the parts of the 1920s. Okay, so let's think if that's happening in Oklahoma. For sure it is. Okay, Oklahoma is seeing prosperity for the first time as a state. Okay, it's only around 13, 14 years old at the time of the Roaring Twenties. Okay, we're seeing Oklahoma boom its economy in oil. Okay, people are getting rich in Osage County and places like Bartlesville, Pawhuska, Okemah. Okay, all these places are just exploding in popularity due to oil. Okay, and that in turn makes cities like Oklahoma City and Tulsa, especially Tulsa, because Tulsa becomes one of the richest oil cities in the world. Okay, so Tulsa becomes a big factor in the American economy. Okay, so all of this is going on in the 1920s. So the Roaring Twenties does come to Oklahoma and eventually does bring success. Okay, so the Dust Bowl, the aftermath of World War One. Okay, so let's think we talked about World War One yesterday in my class. Okay, it did have an impact on Oklahoma. Let's think about it kind of globally. Okay, so the Americans joined the war effort pretty late. Okay, they're not even actually in the war for over a year. Okay, so actually under a year, they're actually fighting in the war. Okay, so they eventually go and fight with the Allies, with Britain and France, and eventually help win the war. Okay, so what happens is Germany is kind of, again, and you guys will see it again in the Second World War, Germany is kind of the biggest factor at play on the enemy side of the war. Okay, so and what happens, especially during this time, when a war ends, you sign a treaty and you have to pay what's called reparations. Okay, so reparations are payments that you have to pay to the people that actually beat you in war to try to pay them for what you did. Okay, so Germany is tasked with paying millions upon millions of dollars in war reparations. Okay, so they end up not paying them and actually eventually create fake money to try to pay them off. They're printing more money, which loses value of the German currency. Okay, so this kind of sets the stage for a world global depression. Okay, so Germany is not paying their war debts, but also this drought is starting out here in central parts of the United States. Okay, that's going to come into play a little bit later on in the whole scheme of things. But also the stock market has just exploded in popularity in the 1920s. Okay, average Americans were buying stocks. People were getting rich left and right off of buying stocks. Okay, there's a little bit of an uneasy feeling that sets in the United States stock market in around September and October of 1929. Okay, so people are kind of unsure of where this whole stock market thing is going. Okay, and eventually we're going to get to the place where the Great Depression actually occurs. Okay, so some of the causes of the Great Depression here in the United States, an overproduction of goods. Okay, that's kind of what leads us into the Dust Bowl. Is there was over farming going on. Okay, the farmers out here in the western parts of Oklahoma didn't allow their crops in their fields to kind of grow back. So they were trying to plant, and the lands really don't act well when that happens. Okay, drought can really wipe out a field, and the topsoil, which you see a picture of it right over here, starts kicking up and makes huge dust storms. Okay, so western Oklahoma and parts of central Oklahoma were almost unlivable during this time, okay, because of all the dust and everything like that. Okay. Also, other factors that play buying on credit. Okay, so we still have credit cards today, but this is a whole different system. Okay, buying on credit, pay later was popular at this time. Okay, so let's say I would go into a store and I was expecting to get paid on Friday. Okay, I would go in and say, hey, I need $20 worth of groceries. And the grocer would go, okay, do you want me to put it on your credit? Yeah, no, that'd be great. Okay, so I would owe $20 once I would have the money, and I would come in and I would pay them. Okay, I would establish a line of credit. Okay, when the Great Depression happened and kind of leading up to this, people were just getting loans on credit like crazy. Okay, so eventually it got so much that the line of credit would never be paid back. Okay, so a lot of these businesses around the United States started to fail because they had given too many faulty loans in a sense. Okay, so the credit loans were just going at a crazy pace that the economy couldn't keep up with. Okay, so I've kind of mentioned the upcoming demise of the U.S. economy that happens. It's called Black Tuesday when you read about it in history textbooks. On October 29th, which was a Tuesday, 1929, the stock market collapsed. Okay, people were selling stocks that were hundreds, $200, $50. They were selling them for pennies on the dollar just to try to get anything. Okay, almost 100 or so thousand people overnight lost everything they had. Okay, the economy literally collapsed. Okay, we've gotten close in recent months to getting into a slight depression. Maybe we've been in a recession, meaning that our economy has kind of been ticked down due to the pandemic. And we've been in the Great Recession of 2008. There's been different instances throughout our history since the Great Depression where our economy has struggled, but nothing has ever come close to what we experienced in 1929. Okay, just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people losing everything they had. Okay, they had it. Let's say if you had money in the bank, let's say if you had all of your life savings in your paycheck in the Bank of Oklahoma. Okay, in 1929, when the stock market crashed, the banks closed and you could not go get your money. Okay, the money was gone. They took your money. Okay, so you were poor. If you had everything left in a bank in 1929, you did not get that money back. Okay, so it's a crazy thing, and President FDR gets to kind of a commission going on that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But just think about that. All of your life savings, all of your money, all of your hard work is gone. Okay, just like this picture here, this is a picture of the movie Grapes of Wrath, which I might assign a little bit of a video of that tomorrow. We'll see how that goes, see if I can find one. But it's a great story of farmers in Oklahoma that had to become migrant farmers. They had to leave Oklahoma and head towards California to try to find migrant farming jobs. Okay, but all of their houses, all their income was gone just overnight. Okay, it was just a crazy, crazy time in American history. Okay, Oklahoma's economy. Let's talk about that. I've hit on earlier in my lesson that Oklahoma's economy is pretty much circled around two things, and it still kind of is actually today. Okay, Oklahoma's economy goes as the oil industry goes. We kind of know that the oil boom happened in the 20s, and oil is still a huge part of what goes on in Oklahoma's economy. But also it's agriculture. Okay, meaning growing crops, raising cattle, all that fun stuff. Okay, so if there's a huge drought, meaning there's a long sustained period of no rain, okay, that is happening in the state, things are not going to go well for the Oklahoma economy. Okay, and a lot of these states along the Great Plains are suffering throughout this time due to the drought. Okay, so here's kind of a sense of what was going on. Cotton, which was actually produced quite a bit in southeastern Oklahoma, cotton dropped to 5 cents a pound, which it was up from around 25 to 30 cents a pound at this time. So every pound was around 25 cents less. So it actually cost you more to get the cotton and produce it to sell it than it actually would selling the cotton. Okay, so people were losing money hand over fist. And also oil prices dropped to 15 cents a barrel. Okay, as I said, the economy in Oklahoma goes as the oil industry. Okay, Oklahoma's oil dropped to around 15 cents a barrel. Okay, so it was not even worth almost drilling oil. Okay, so oil companies that employed hundreds and hundreds of people in Oklahoma were pretty much gone overnight due to the Great Depression. Okay, so a lot of people became jobless, homeless, needing food, groceries, shelter, anything like that. Okay, it was a very big disaster. Okay, farmers and oilmen, like I said, were left to become very poor overnight. Okay, sometimes you would have to go to the nearest city and get in what was called a bread line or a soup line. Okay, and sometimes, I mean, they would run out of food. Okay, if you got there late. Okay, so it was kind of a barbaric situation where it was kind of first come first serve, and if we ran out, it was done. Okay, so it was a very very sad time during American history. Okay, so let's talk about the New Deal and kind of what brings America out of the Great Depression. Okay, so obviously it didn't go on forever. We live in a pretty decent society economically. Now I know we're going through hard times with COVID and all that stuff, but America has been resilient in the past, and this is kind of when it starts economically. Okay, so FDR is the guy on the bottom right hand corner, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, he ran for president in 1932 on a platform of the New Deal. Okay, he was the Democratic nominee. Okay, President Hoover was the president in 1928, and a lot of people actually do blame him for the Great Depression. Okay, I think Hoover did have quite a bit to do with it, but also the economy was just ripe at the time to fail. Okay, it had just been going high, 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 and it was bound to have a low. People didn't really know how to react to that. Okay, so FDR goes on. In my opinion, FDR, other than Abraham Lincoln, is my favorite American president, due to him literally bringing our economy and our country out of the Great Depression and also leading us through the Second World War, which at the time, a lot of people thought America was going to get defeated or invaded, and America was finished because there were two wars going on. The morale of the country was pretty low, but actually, in turn, the Second World War actually brought the United States out of the Great Depression in a sense. Okay, so FDR brought us out of the Great Depression and also through the greatest conflict in human history. So I'd say that man's resume is pretty solid. He was one of the only presidents to actually serve 3 terms, but dies pretty soon into his 3rd term. Okay, so FDR ran for president in 32. On the ticket for the Democratic Party was actually the governor of Oklahoma, a guy by the name of Alfalfa Bill Murray. Okay, so that's a picture of him on the top right. Okay, so FDR defeats him, no problem, and he eventually defeats the incumbent president, Herbert Hoover, in 32 elections. So FDR, like I said, ran on a New Deal platform, meaning he believed America had to achieve a New Deal in getting out of this Great Depression. So he created numerous job opportunities. Okay, the CCC, which worked on national parks renovation, on highways, on different things like that. But also the biggest one in Oklahoma was called the Public Works Association. Okay, so I don't know why. I think I may have gotten that wrong. I think it's the WPA. But what that was is these different entities that he created were actually purposefully done to try to hire people that had lost their jobs. So it gave them a manual labor job to get them a steady income. And in turn, it actually eventually got us new things like interstates and revised our infrastructure and national parks in turn of people getting jobs. So it kind of helped America out, but also helped the workers. Okay, so FDR was a very, very smart man. He also created a insurance corporation called the FDIC. This is very, very important. Like I mentioned earlier, if you had money in banks in 1929, once Black Tuesday occurred, they had the right to take your money and not give it back. Okay, so this happened to a lot of people in the United States. Okay, FDR and a lot of his advisors realized that was wrong, and so he created the FDIC. Okay, if you go to a bank now, when you walk in the door and you see a sticker on the door that says FDIC, which they have to make sure that you know that they are a member of the FDIC, that they will not take your money in case the bank closes. Okay, so let's say, again, if I had money in Bank of Oklahoma and they close today, the whole branch, the whole company closes, they by law have to insure my money. So if I had, say, $100 in there, they by law have to pay me $100. Okay, so we can thank FDR for that. Okay, so wrapping up on the Dust Bowl, a drought encompassed the whole Great Plains, like I had mentioned in the early parts of the 30s. Whole towns would be engulfed in huge dust storms. Okay, it was just a very, very bad time in Oklahoma history. It was bad for your lungs. People were wearing masks like they do now. Okay, because these dust storms were just so random. Okay, many Okies. So we're going to learn what the phrase Okie means. Uh, an Okie was at this time did not mean just a person from Oklahoma. It meant a person from the Great Plains that was a farmer that had to become a migrant farm worker during this time. Okay, so it became a derogatory phrase, meaning that they were kind of just moving along, trying to get jobs wherever they could. Okay, so there's a really famous book, like I mentioned, Grapes of Wrath, that kind of details the voyage of an Okie all the way out to California to go ahead and become a migrant farm worker out there. But also a guy by the name of Woody Guthrie, that's his picture right there, becomes pretty famous because he was an Okie himself and traveled around the country and wrote songs about what he saw and his political opinions about what was going on. Okay, so this kind of encompasses the 20s and 30s of Oklahoma and gets us into the times around the Second World War. So that's probably where we're going to head next in my class. Okay, so go ahead and finish this Ed puzzle. I'm going to go ahead and I haven't decided yet. I might post an assignment over Woody Guthrie for today. I'll probably do it for tomorrow. Okay, so go ahead and just complete this Ed puzzle, and you guys have a good day.